Değerli misafirlerimiz, 8. Türkiye Rüzgar Enerjisi.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first session. Once again, I'd like to welcome you all. The main theme of the session will be global outlook, innovations and opportunities. I'd like to invite to the floor one by one, first the moderator and the speakers of the session. The session will be moderated by Giles Dixon, CEO of Wind Europe. And the speakers will be from Enercon GmbH, Managing Director Dr. Marcos. From Nordex Group, CEO José Luis Bianco Diogues. Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy Onshore CEO, Mr. Alfonso Faubel. Vestas MENA, Latin America, President Eduardo Medina Sanchez. GE Middle East, North Africa and Turkey region CEO, Dr. Manar Al-Moif.
Hear us, ladies and gentlemen. Excellent. Delighted to be starting the afternoon with you all. We are going to spend the next hour and a quarter discussing all of the real issues that we heard about from the Minister, from the regulator, and from the Chairman of the Parliamentary Committee this morning. And we have the A-team of the wind turbine manufacturing industry here in Turkey. I'm going to begin by giving the floor to José Luis Blanco, the CEO of Nordex Acciona Wind Power. José Luis, Nordex has been here from the very beginning of the development of wind energy in Turkey. Let's not talk about the past, let's focus on the future. What's your vision for the development of wind in this country? What are your priorities? What do you want the government to be doing?
I would say that, so first of all, thank you for organizing this event to bring industry participants together with government. It's a quite important initiative. I would say that, in general speaking, renewables, and especially wind, we accomplished something that was unbelievable to think of just a few years ago. From being a very heavily subsidized sector to being able to contribute to lower cost of energy to society, on top of being a key instrument fighting climate change. So in our view, I think first, Turkey is home for us. We've been very successful here. We are very successful here. And that's not the important part. The important part is the future, as you mentioned, Gilles. And I think Turkey has everything that it needs in order to be a massive market. So in order to be a massive market, you need basically three things, which is the regulation, grid, and wind. And Turkey has plenty of wind, plenty of land, plenty of need for energy. We can deliver cheap energy. So if we put a little bit regulation, this is going to be an easy task to achieve, and society will benefit. Wind, on top of helping to decarbonize energy, can create massive wealth in supply chain, in companies that export Turkish products, in management, university, technology centers. So we are at the inch of putting this together to explode the market. We are not yet there. I think if we work together, we can be there.
That's great. And what sort of regulation would you like?
I mean, on top of the traditional, JECA tenders, I think the Turkey is in a fantastic position to tackle private PPAs, other sort of market mechanisms that enlarge the possibility of the market to grow substantially more and on top of the current size. More permitting, easing the permits. It's very important that we don't make the mistakes here as in some other European countries where the permitting machine stops, and when the permitting machine needs to restart, it takes 2 or 3 years. So you go from record levels to no levels, and this is not good for the industry. We need long-term vision, predictability. Our plants run efficiently if they run with volume and if they run in a normal load base. On and off is not good for our business, which at the end translates into not visibility for investment, which translates into more cost for the product, which translates into more price for the consumer. So the more visibility we can bring, the lower we can reduce our costs and the more we can invest to tackle this opportunity.
Thank you very much, José Luis. Eduardo Medina, you're president of Vestas across a huge part of the world, all of the Middle East, North Africa, Mediterranean, and Latin America. You cover many countries. José Luis has been very specific on permitting. How would you compare the state of permitting in Turkey to permitting in all of the other countries that you cover, and how would you like it to improve?
I will require like 5 days to okay. So I think that we need to describe that in the past, and the beginning until 2013, all the industry was heavily subsidized through feed-in tariffs and local content in many countries. From 2013 onwards, we have seen the wall of auctions driving the price of electricity and the cost of electricity very, very low, and we have today the wind energy competing in most part of the countries with the conventional energy. And we need to prepare for the next, for the future, for the next steps, which is we are going to go from capacity to energy management. And in the future, we will see no feed-in tariffs, we will see energy management, we will see hybridization, digitalization. So we'll have to prepare our permitting process in the future for that. So depending where you are in the world, with much more mature markets are evolving towards those type of permittings where you have more focus on the new topics, or if you are in countries that are still growing and require to reach a certain level, they are going very fast into auctions. I think in terms of, for us, what we need is a long-term view of 5 years. We need kind of support system that supports our investments. We need kind of a feed-in tariff or support or minimum floor in order to be able to finance the project. We need clarity. We need to make sure that in our permitting process we are also already including hybridization with other technologies, digitalization, in order to be able to manage energy. And also in terms of local content, which is also related to permitting in some countries, what we say is we have learned the bad things from many countries, meaning that we need to avoid that by subsidizing the local content industry, we are creating suppliers that are not competitive at global scale. So in the future, local content has to compete itself at global scale. If not, it will happen what is happening today in some of our countries in Europe and other places, that we are unfortunately closing fabs, right? So.
Thank you for that, Eduardo. Alfonso Faubal, as CEO of Siemens Gamesa onshore, you, of course, were the first winners of the YECA 1,000, up to 1,000 megawatts. So you have a real stake in support schemes as they are in this country. Both José Luis and Eduardo have talked about the importance of getting the support schemes right. How would you like to see the YECA evolving, and what would you like to see by way of successor to the YECDEM when it expires at the end of next year?
Thanks, Giles. In fact, I subscribed to everything I've heard so far. And let me also mention, we have been transmitting these same messages, not only to this great public here, but also to representatives of the Turkish government. And I'm very pleased by the receptiveness and the transparency by which our issues, our challenges, which are common, are being received. So I want to thank the Turkish government representatives for this. Having said that, talking about the next steps, and this is the same feedback that we share collectively and personally to this government representatives, that needs to understand that first there was a YECA 1 where in fact we were blessed with 1 gigawatt with esteemed partners of ours. As part of that commitment, we developed something which is essential if you want to create an industry in this country. We created a technical center, a research and development center, a place where we can have 20, 50 PhDs, local PhD, contributing to developing technology that will be used locally, but also internationally. As the minister mentioned this morning, it is creating talent to come back, that studied abroad, to find a place in this country to continue contributing with a purpose. As part of the YECA 1, also, we committed, and in fact, this month, we will inaugurate our nacelle assembly facility, both centers located in Izmir. So it is, in fact, thanks to that commitment, thanks to obviously the presence that Siemens Gamesa has in this country since many, many years, over 100 years, if you think about Siemens, one of our partners. And thanks to that work that we're going to be doing as part of the consortium, that we were blessed with this 1,000 gigawatts. What is important now is not only to have visibility, we need to build this industry, and there is a learning curve to build the industry, to build the components that are going to be used in the nacelle assembly facility, all the generators, bearings, all the components that are going to be used for this industry need right now go through a learning curve to be certified, to be qualified for this industry. There are already many of them, but in order to do this, not only do we need to have the visibility, but we need also have incentive schemes that allow to cover for that learning curve cost. Because at the end of the day, how can we compete against other forms of non-renewable energy? How can we compete in lowering the LCOE, the cost of energy, if we don't subsidize, if we don't cover through incentives that learning curve of the industry locally? So this is what I will be looking forward in the next rounds. Some kind of support that allows precisely that, the industry to continue growing vertically and horizontally. I don't think that is a crazy idea, candidly, because we can see these examples happening successfully in many countries around the world. I think you mentioned some places where we've witnessed globally, all of us here, that this scheme, if not treated correctly, can lead to uncompetitive local suppliers. We need to play that smartly, but we need to play it.
Thank you for that, Alfonso. Manal Munef, you, like Eduardo, have large geographical responsibility across the whole of the Middle East and North Africa and Turkey. But unlike Eduardo, Alfonso, and José Luis, if I'm not mistaken, you don't just cover renewables, you cover the whole portfolio of the GE group, correct? Which of course has interests in gas-fired power generation, coal-fired power generation, steam turbines for nuclear plants, and so on. What we've heard so far is very much a pro-renewables push. How do you see the future energy mix here in Turkey from your broader whole GE group perspective?
Just to correct, I cover the renewable part, not the full portion of gas and coal, but GE is an active player in this one. But if you look at the energy transition, not only in Turkey, but across the region, you're seeing phenomenal growth in renewable across the board. You're seeing it in both oil importing countries and oil exporting countries, because the technology is proven and the price, the LCOE, is by far more competitive. In Turkey, wind is half of the cost of gas, at a minimum if you look at it, equally as well as coal. So it's a no-brainer for us to move toward renewable. If you look at the CAGR growth of renewable over the next coming 5 years, you're looking at an average CAGR of 28%, and if you specifically focus on wind, it's nearly 23% CAGR growth. You do not see this in any other power generation. If you think by 2050, you're actually going to see a complete different dramatic change of the energy sources. 39% is going to come from solar, 28% is going to come from wind, and gas is going to drop all the way to 15%. So there is a major shift in the energy mix, and this is now enabled due to the major transformation in energy Technology is much more competitive. You are producing bigger turbine, able to produce more energy at cheaper cost. So it's a no-brainer that the technology is proven. There is capability and technology that will allow it to grow further.
Now, GE also has a grid solutions business, of
We
course.
do.
When you're getting into these very high levels of renewables penetration, both wind and solar that you've described, what challenges do you see in Turkey in terms of integrating all of those variable renewables in the energy system?
So GE has one of the largest and broadest renewable, coverage. We're in onshore wind, we're in offshore, in hydro, in grid, in hybrid, in battery storage, as well as in the component manufacturing, such as LM. It was important to have the grid business as part of the renewable because it's a major enabler whenever you speak of renewable. One of the major barriers for us when we develop renewable opportunity is the grid capability and capacity. Can it take certain amount of renewable and at what frequency? As well as the grid intermittency that can be a blocker for us. So having this as part of the portfolio, going to the customers, government with one end-to-end value proposition of how can we support them both from the grid side as well as the technology side is a major game changer and help to address a lot of these challenges.
And what would your advice to the Turkish government be on how to integrate, let us say, 50% of variable renewables in the electricity mix? Would it be build some peaker plants, demand response, storage, expand the transmission network? What should Turkey do?
We should start first by hybrids. I think so this is a no-brainer. Today where you can get the best out of the sun and the best out of the wind, that will give you something more stability toward the grid. And at certain places you can add some battery storage. The battery storage cost significantly dropped in the last just 2 years. It dropped by 8-fold. So it's becoming much more competitive. And in some areas today in Turkey, they have a fantastic wind speed that you're achieving already above 50% capacity factor. Adding a bit of solar in that can go high. In some parts of the region, actually I have example in Morocco, I would say, I have a capacity factor of over 65%. You don't see this in gas. And this is the beauty of how can you actually work with technology to make sure you add complementary technology from a renewable perspective to make sure you're achieving the idea of a base load.
And your 65% capacity factor in Morocco is coming from a combination of wind and solar?
Only wind.
Gosh.
Only wind, because they have a wind speed of nearly 12 meters per second.
Yeah. Eduardo, you talked about hybrid projects as well. Do you have any examples yet, investors anywhere in your region?
No, not specifically in my region. We are started to work very hard in Australia. We have a project there, which is the Kennedy project, what we are, installing the first big-scale project. And this is required mainly because of the local legislation and the way they are managing energy in the future. We are also working in Spain with some of our customers. In Spain, you have areas where you have very good complementarity between wind and solar, and we are already starting projects to integrate wind, solar, and storage in the south of Spain. Working very closely with the Brazilian government, because in the northeast of Brazil, also wind is at night, solar is during the day, so it's the perfect combination. And also in order to have ancillary services, we are already working on the engineering of the specific hybrid projects. And also in Mexico, it makes a lot of sense. I know, probably José Luis can explain more about that in the US, there are already storage auctions, and it's also very, very complementary with all our wind installations.
Okay, thank you for that. Marcus, sorry, I've been slow bringing you into the discussion. Marcus Orlowski, Head of Business Development at Enercon. You have been developing some interesting wind and storage demonstration projects in the north of Germany. Could you tell us something about that and what you're doing more broadly on hybrids, whether it's wind, storage, and solar?
Yeah, it's true that we are very active in this field. As the colleagues have said, this is something where you can push forward also to support the wind energy in general. So to increase the integration into the grid, and for this we have on the one hand, of course, activities on the battery storage. So this is something where we are doing very much experimental things with different kinds of batteries, etc., etc. In the past, we have started also some activities on power to gas, so to store the electricity, the energy into gas and bring it back, but also to use the gas later on, perhaps hydrogen, as a mean for other industries. So these activities we have done in the past. We are pushing this very much. And perhaps something which has not been mentioned yet, what we also push in Germany at least and in Central Europe, are charging stations. So this is a field which we have started in the past, where we use our control and steering technology of the wind turbines for charging stations, for ultra-high-speed charging stations. So they have the same characteristics as the wind turbine, and so can also support the grid. So this is perhaps something which is also interesting for the grid operators, that these activities, so the perhaps later on very high number of charging stations, are not affecting the grid negatively. So this is perhaps a spin-off of the turbine technology, but is something which we are pushing very much.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's bring the discussion back to Turkey. Eduardo, if I heard you correctly, you talked about the possibility of a price floor. Is that so?
Yeah.
In the future support?
No, what we need is visibility, in which will be the forward regulation in order to make sure that we have a sustainable market in Turkey. We can have a price floor, we can have a reference price, but this is extremely important if we want to finance the projects going forward.
Okay.
So because right now I understand that in Turkey we don't know what is going to happen post-2020, and I think it will be very, very important for us in order to keep our activity here to get clarity on that.
Okay, thank you. And you think that would help to unlock financing for projects?
Yeah.
Okay. José Luis, what do you think is the key to unlocking financing for future projects here?
Visibility on cash flows.
Visibility on?
Cash flows.
Yes.
Cash flows of the projects, and that's a combination of CapEx, hours, and capital cost, basically. So whatever you can do to bring more visibility on wind hours is up to us and up to our customers to bring the good technology to the right sites, to bring the best wind sites, and the rest is capital costs and CapEx.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier...
And price, of course. I mean, which is... so the more volatility you put into the price, the lower leverage you can get, the higher energy price you will get out of the asset.
Yes. And you mentioned earlier corporate PPAs as well. You meant corporate PPAs?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Well, this, you know very well, this is a trending topic in not just European countries, but worldwide, and is unleashing untapped demand that was there. And why is that? Because renewable, when you do it in a big scale, it can be very competitive and way more competitive than natural sources, than conventional sources. So at the end, melting aluminium or even the steel industry can benefit from this low cost of energy. But in our view, and I was a little bit, I see Turkey has all the potential, but in my view, I think the country can be more ambitious. I mean, this is a volume game. You bring massive volume, you get very low costs. You don't bring massive volume, costs are high, because we need to run the factories with very low activity. We need to invest suboptimal because there is no volume. So if we really want to enjoy low cost of renewables in Turkey, bring the volume, and the cost will go dramatically down. And how to get the volume is either, and one asks, if I might say, given the very bad experience in many other countries worldwide, and specifically in Europe, do the transitions smart. I mean, we need to acknowledge that governments have the responsibility to drive legislation, and we need to fulfill legislation. But the smoother you do the transition, the less painful the transition is going to be. If you want to transition from A to B, maybe build B at the same time you keep A, and not stopping A until you build B, because then it could become like Germany, that we are suffering badly there, from record high volumes in history to no market. And this has consequences for the industry, companies going bust, Chapter 11 in many suppliers, so then when you need the industry again, you need to reinvest in building the industry back. So long-term stability, key. Of course, governments, they have the duties to drive legislation in one way or the other, fine. The ask is do that in a smart way without stopping what is working, maybe building the new scheme in parallel of keeping the current scheme until you see the new scheme works, and then you can put more efforts in scheme A, B, C, or A, B, and C. If you analyze what's going on in the rest of the world, it's a combination of everything. It's a combination of private PPAs, a combination of customer taking the market risk, because the spread is so big between the cost and the market price, and a combination with floor price, and a combination with tenders with local content. So it's not one or the other. It's finding the right combination of one and the other.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Eduardo.
Yes, just related to the comment on cash flows from Jose Luis and the offtake. I mean, we need visibility. Right now we have a feed-in tariff which is 10 years. I think it will be good to have visibility on kind of offtake that will be for 15 years, that will ease financing, meaning that financing today represents more than 30% of the cost of electricity at the level of pricing that we have today from wind energy. So financing represents a big portion of the success of this market. So I think that instead of 10 years going to 15 years, that will unlock a lot of financing possibilities. And also, from my personal point of view, we still have a very rigid localization rules in Turkey. We should go to a much more flexible situation. If you ask to some of the banks that are coming from outside, or they are providing today credit export insurance, they would like to see more flexibility and lower content rules in order to be able to float with more funds in the future. So I think that in order to unlock financing, I think we need a clear long-term view on offtake for 15 years. It is good that it's a US dollar denominated, because that kills part of the exchange risk. But it will be also probably good to have it in euros today, because it's much easier to fund financing in Turkey for coming from Europe rather than from the US. And then the last ask, in order to be able to, is to have much more flexible local content.
Mm-hmm. Mana, 15 years offtake. GE built a wind farm in Sweden on the back of a PPA with a large aluminium manufacturer. I think it was a 15-year offtake agreement, and it was a very large wind farm. And you have a team of people inside GE specifically working on these sort of PPAs with industrial consumers. What sort of lessons did you learn from that project that might be relevant to Turkey? There's a lot of heavy industry in this country that might be interested in signing PPAs with wind.
Absolutely. That project in Sweden is Mark Bigden at 600 megawatt. So private PPA, it's mainly under a team that we have, which is market development. And the reason that we created this team, because GE, we have the capability and the expertise of how to develop projects quickly. If you look at Turkey as well as the region in general, we have a lot of developers that used to be in the gas business and now came to renewable. Some of them do not have a lot of expertise to expedite the project development in terms of all the permits, what does it take to develop it quickly. That's why GE have said that we're going to be involved with these developers, do some market development, support them of how to do all of the wind measurement studies, the technical studies, to make sure the project is ready and is financeable. And in some countries where you have the ability to do private PPA, example, in Europe, they started doing that, and we've just signed another one with Google. In Morocco, they're doing that as part of the 1309 law. In a lot of the countries, as well as Turkey, they're talking about it. The question, how can you create a mechanism that's going to be flexible a mechanism that's going to give you clarity on the market with a guaranteed offtake and a connection with the grid operator of how is this going to work. So I believe Turkey has been talking about this for the last 2 years, and I think so they're going to start developing regulation in that. And this was the ask that we've all said. There is a need for clarity on the market post-YECDEM. So once the feed-in tariff is ready, how are you going to be looking at the merchant? How is the private PPA is going to be part of this? How is these projects going to be financed? How are you going to encourage the local content if this is ever going to be something? Because it's a balance that we need to look at. You're encouraging localization at one point, and in parallel, there is a challenge in creating an attractive financing option. So there's a lot of things that need to be cleared, and one of them is the merchant market and the private PPA play. Do you want to create a specific segment to that, or do you want to keep it as part of the merchant? And the grid operator will create these private PPAs.
Okay, thank you for that. José Luis, you talked about the importance of scale, volume, big volume, low costs. You are a manufacturer with a footprint across the world in many countries. Of course, this big volume you aspire to in Turkey would be supported by your own plant here in Turkey. Could you, and I'm then going to put the same question to the rest of you, tell us something about how you see your manufacturing here in Turkey compared to your plants elsewhere in terms of the relative competitiveness, productivity, the support you get from local authorities and so on.
I think, well, Turkey is an industrial country, so that's a good start. It's sizable. There are good companies. There are very well-educated people, knowledgeable about their trade. So, I mean, at least we have a very good basis to work with. With that being said, and we have been discussing with governmental officials, in our view, it's very important that the country, decide strategically what are the sectors, what they think that it could be developed into worldwide champions. Because in our view, it doesn't make sense that you invest taxpayer money in subsidizing a sector that doesn't have chances to be competitive globally. Because at the end, you develop something here in Turkey, the market in Turkey drops, and the company that you help to develop is going to suffer to be competitive global, and that doesn't help anybody, reality. So this is I would say, the somehow less positive side of things. The positive side is that, and it's the same with some of my colleagues, thanks to the initial local content development, we've been able to develop suppliers that even without a market in Turkey can compete globally. So it can be done. But of course, having a strong local market helps a lot. I mean, and this has been proven all over the world, that the companies that we remain in the wind business, all of us have had, in a moment in time, the support of a very strong local market development. So this is very important as well for the government. If strategically they want to develop the industry into be part of the global volume in wind industry, it's very important that they develop the market mechanism to have sizable local market and stability on the local market, because on and off doesn't help the strategic supply chain development. The supply chain needs stability as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Marcus, do you agree with what José Luis has just said? And if you do, how do you see the relative competitiveness of the Turkish supply chain vis-à-vis the Chinese supply chain?
Well, I fully agree with what José Luis has said. Just to bring some of our experience in the past months, we can say. We have just in these months extended our supply chain in Turkey. So we have started to work with partners and are now producing together with them our latest turbine models. And what the colleagues have reported back to the headquarters is that it's been very, very smooth. And especially the setup of plants was very, very smooth in Turkey, much faster than we not expect, but experience in Germany. And I think this is something which should be kept. So the rules and regulations should not, let's say, limit the manufacturing supplier to expand their plans, etc., etc. But this is something which we have made very good experience in the past months, and so this should be kept. In fact, at the moment, we are thinking Turkey as a hub for exporting turbine parts, complete turbines, to other countries. In fact, for the smaller turbines, for our 1 megawatt platform, we more or less export the complete production to other countries, nearby countries. So this is a good example that in a lot of cases, the Turkish supply chain and the Turkish factories, our own factories and the supply chain is competitive. But of course, it's a crucial balance. So from our feeling for the small turbines, we are currently exporting it fits. But for the larger one, it's tight. So I think it's very important that the government, as we have mentioned, all of us, keep an eye on the industry, keeps the amount of activities, the market alive in Turkey, and with this supports the activities or the export activities of the manufacturers and the suppliers.
Thank you. Eduardo.
Related to the question about how competitive is the Turkish local content, if you compare that with the Chinese, it's not competitive today. Well, of course, I mean, you have a huge local content in China that is supplying all the manufacturers, globally speaking, and we come with a significant part of our local content is based in China. So today, probably some of the components are cheaper to bring them from China and install them in Turkey rather than to manufacture them locally. So I know that is a trade-off, that we need to have local content to generate jobs, because this is extremely important for Turkey. We have a supply base here based on partners, blades, towers, generators. In some of the cases, some of those components are competitive at global scale, but I will say that most of them are not competitive. I mean, in some cases, we are creating problems to some of our suppliers, because today, I think I mentioned this to the minister, that today we are doing crazy things. We are introducing products faster and faster. In the past, we were closer to the car industry, where every 5 years we have a new wind turbine. Today, it's every 2 years, or less than 2 years, we want to introduce a new product, because our customers, they want to have a better cost of electricity. But the problem that we are having is that we need huge investments. We need to develop our suppliers, and they are not following up. And also developing suppliers in Turkey, and I know that we have some of them here. We are also creating problems to them, because we cannot provide them with the speed of development of a new supplier, with the required volume, etc. So, and another comment is, this year we are supplying 100 megawatts, close to 1 gigawatt from Turkey to the export to the international market. But this is due to a very curious thing, which is the Trump tariff, or some populist markets that are imposing import duties. So normally we were bringing equipment from China to the US. Now we are bringing equipment from China to Europe, and from Europe and Turkey to the US. So, and this together with the logistics cost, because remember, every time we do bigger and bigger and bigger wind turbines, the logistics costs are more and more important. So to have a very important local market is extremely important. So now with the new CO2 and NOx regulations for transportations, also the cost of logistics is going up. So it's more and more important.
Thank you. Alfonso.
Yeah, let me quickly react. And let me twist it a little bit around, because I agree. I mean, how can we not agree, because we all now sit in the same boat? But a few observations, at the risk of sounding academic. Siemens Gamesa, we are 25,000 employees around the world, with plants, locations, literally in every angle of this planet almost. Let's first analyze what you mentioned specifically, China versus Turkey. Let's see what has happened in China. You mentioned one reason why you're switching supply chain out of one country, could be Turkey, instead of China, which is tariffs. But think about it, distance is another one. When you make an equation, you need to, and especially in our business, need to take into consideration the distance factor. It's tremendous, the logistics of it. Just because I want to be in a specific sector doesn't mean that I can necessarily be competitive exporting it, because maybe the markets you need to export are too far away. The cost cannot justify it. So that is one key consideration in our industry. It's not the same in the cars, because you put them in a container, off they go. Umbrellas, same story. But when you're talking about a nacelle, no. So distance is in one element. Cost, think what's happening in China. Labor costs on the hourly basis, very content. Very competitive, but what's happening in the white collar level? White collar in China is getting, right now, very close to European levels, South European levels, if I may say. So, again, where is the competitive advantage that one has to develop if one wants to compete on an international basis? Because again, taking a snapshot today, China versus Turkey has a lot of connotation. So, however, what we don't have in Turkey, what we do have in China, it's a very proven supply chain. The whole value chain, from the basic components all the way to assembly, it's a mature market. And yes, the rat race for reducing LCOE and therefore creating every 18 months new wind turbines is not helping, because we need to retrain the entire supply chain.
And China is 20 years per year, right?
Exactly, and they last so little. So we are not making ourselves or the industry helping it with such a rat race. There needs to be some kind of balance in this. Candidly, and I leave that question to the floor, but I feel that we are coming to that acknowledgement as OEMs, but also as the entire value chain behind it. So coming back to China versus Turkey, there is certainly a lot of competitive advantages in China. I just mentioned some that could be not so competitive for Turkey, not so competitive for China. The reality is again, I need to echo what has been said before. You want to create a cluster in Turkey for wind. For what? For the domestic market, for international market. Well, for domestic market, you have a beautiful existing electromechanical industry dedicated for the car manufacturing. There's been hubs here for years. In my old world and in automotive, Turkey was great because it was competitive with capable workforce. It was great, absolutely great. That can be easily extrapolable to the wind turbine. By the way, not by chance, a typical bill of material of a car has 8,000 components, which is the same number that a wind turbine has. So just as an anecdote. But having said that, you need to figure out that at the end of the day, if we see in other countries where there has been a stop because lack of visibility, lack of volumes, the entire value chain, the entire supply chain has to became desperate. So they needed to find other places. So exports was a solution, but not because they were optimistic that they had a competitive proposal, a competitive offering, but because there was no alternative. We either find it volumes outside of own domestic market, or we die. So this is the challenge. It's the decision that this region, this government needs to make is, do I want to create a competitive hub for the domestic market and for the international market that does the international competitiveness because of desperation, because there's no visibility, or with optimism, because we have really subsidized an industry till it becomes mature, and now, in X time, it can start becoming really competitive on an international basis.
Thank you for that, Alfonso. When we compare the competitiveness of the European manufacturing industry, all of the supply chain that you have, the 5 of you across the rest of Europe, to the Chinese competition, we tend to say, yes, we beat the Chinese on quality. We sometimes, often even beat them on price, but we always lose on terms of finance, because the Chinese come with the state-backed finance and export credit guarantees and so on. What should Turkey be doing to support the export capability of the wind industry here? José Luis.
I would say, well, first, I personally have a lot of respect for Chinese players and the Chinese wind industry, and it's an example how government and companies created a very competitive sector, and was based on, initially could be labor cost, but the main competitive advantage of Chinese company supply chain is volume, is scale. They have 50% of the worldwide volume, and out of the 50% that is not for China, they maybe do 60% of the worldwide castings or the worldwide forgings. So they invest massively in infrastructure, in industrial infrastructure, to have good quality, average quality, competitive products. So home market, very sizable home market, investment in infrastructure, in the right components, and you create global champions in the field. So that was very well thought strategically. So I would say the products, in my view, they have fantastic engineers, they have fantastic suppliers. The only difference is that the wind regime in China is different than in the worldwide market. And in my view, I would say Chinese companies are not so used to the small projects in Europe, 10 turbines here, 5 turbines there. They are not used to that segmentation of customers and segmentation of markets. They are more selling the standard product, big time, big scale. If you talk about financial cost and export credit, it's really a big advantage for, in our view as well, for countries where normal export credit agencies do not go. But I don't see an advantage in many other countries. I mean, where you can bring KfW or Euler Hermes or other export or US export credit, there is no such a big difference. And to the contrary, I think they still need to work in getting, I would say, the market reputation. But other than those countries, Africa, for instance, sure. I mean, this is a big advantage of Chinese companies versus European companies, and that's mainly export credit. I mean, there are countries that Chinese are willing to finance, either providing funds or providing insurance, that Europeans are not willing to. And those markets are going to be conquered by Chinese.
Yeah. On export credit, how important is it that the European export credit agencies return to playing a very active role here in the development of wind energy in Turkey? How crucial are they to the further expansion of wind here in Turkey? One often tends to think about EKF, the Danish agency, the Spanish agency. Eduardo, any thoughts on this?
No, I think it's crucial. I think it's required in order to protect the investment in the international funds, and I think it will be very important also in the future. So, but this has to come together with the flexibilization of the local content rules, with the offtake longer-term agreements, because they will enter always if they only see there is support in the long run. For example, right now with EKF, we are struggling in Argentina, no, with all the situation with that country, and they are stopping all the activity, and they have stopped completely the activity of the wind industry there. So I think during lunch today, one of the members of the government were saying that the Turkish government was the Turkish currency was under attack. And I think that in order to be able to finance projects in the future, I think the support from these credit agencies will be extremely, extremely important.
But there is a tension between that and the push for localization here in Turkey, of course.
Precisely. You need both. It's not one or the other. It's, I mean,
you have different segments of customers. You have customers can self-finance, customers that will use local financing, customers that you have a mix. And what is interesting, actually, you know, just another reflection. In fact, think about the turmoil that we have. ECAs require visibility, like any other investor. because the bank requires visibility, which a customer requires and has to provide, which ultimately the regulatory body needs to provide. But another concern they have, every ECA, every ECA, every export credit agency around the world, is political risk. Now think what's happening around the world, really, between Brexit, between the Chinese, US trade wars, you name it. There is so much unrest around the world that is not really helping that either. There's kind of a momentum right now, independently from what happens or not in Turkey. There's right now a momentum around the world that is kind of like, let's wait and see what happens. You know? That's the kind of the feedback I'm getting from the market. So over and above all the challenges that we're facing for the industry in the country developing it, we have that too, from a macroeconomic perspective. Not to be disqualified. So while ECAs, so ECAs, are therefore a little reluctant, because wait and see, the show must go on. We need to continue developing this industry. And you're absolutely right. It's going to be like, well, let's finance it all 100% for ECA or 80%, foreign banks. But then the challenge will be really to create a local industrial cluster that, like in the automotive, can compete internationally.
What about the private institutional investors? They are sitting on loads of capital. They are desperate for yield, for stable, steady revenues. They don't have to be very high. They're very interested in investing in infrastructure, especially in renewable energy infrastructure. How do they see the Turkish market?
At the risk of being, again, capturing all the floor, what I'm seeing around the world, another interesting factor is the mix that you have in the customers, and something that in Turkey is not just happening. So the question is, when is going to happen? 5 years ago, and I talked to my colleagues here, the typical customer segments you would see would be developers, would be utilities. What we're seeing in some of the most developed markets is the entry, very strong entry since 3, 4, 5 years ago, of funds. It's a complete new segment that is coming in with a lot of strength. There is an excess of liquidity around the world with negative interest rates for deposits. So imagine what all those funds are looking for. They're looking for industries in which they can invest, in sectors that are reliable and with a purpose, many. And guess what? Wind energy is one of them. Now, no different than the ECAs, I believe. What they were looking for is visibility, certainty, and the lowest risk possible.
Mana, you have an in-house institutional investor, GE Capital. How do you get on persuading them to release funds for Turkey?
Yeah. Oh.
Turkish market is a very interesting market, and GE has been interested in that for a long term. But today, when you look at it beyond just GE Capital, you look at it at the broader perspective. Today, the renewable energy market, the LCOE, the cost of energy, is going down dramatically. And investors across the board are interested in market where they can get the best IRR. Turkish wind energy is one of the best in terms of wind capabilities, in terms of prices that they have. But the problem, what makes international investors, and specifically developers, worried from penetrating the Turkish market, is the long duration for projects to be permitted and developed, and sometimes the clarity on the process. Sometimes some of those international investors are not very comfortable to come and become a developer in the Turkish market. Now, the pain of finance appeared in the last couple of years. Before that, the Turkish market have never ever faced a problem when it comes to financing. The pain specifically came with the currency devaluation, with the economic pressure, and therefore there was a necessity to look for the most competitive cost of financing. Obviously, the European ECA for the offshore portion do that, but there is a big portion that have to come locally. And this is where I think so not only GE, but GE Capital, as well as all of my other colleagues, the other companies, are working on solutions with the customer of how can we bring DFIs across the board, how can we bring, funds from across the world to support the major initiatives. Obviously, because they're just being introduced to the Turkish market, so the speed of movement is not very fast. But once you develop the baseline, I believe it's going to be much more faster for them to get comfort on the market of how it's structured, how is the payment, for them to create a competitive financing mechanism in parallel. GE Capital, we're very interested for some projects in Turkey. Actually, we decided to go as a co-developer because it makes sense. We believe in the market. We believe in the structure, we believe in the capability, and therefore we believe we can provide a very good offering. Obviously, we're not a financing entity, period, but we're there to support in the beginning at least, till we can create a financing structure that's more stable.
Eduardo.
In relation to this type of investments, we see more and more this coming into renewable industry. They are leaving the oil and gas investments and moving those monies to renewable energy. The issue that they are finding is they have a lot of funds, but they don't have good projects. We see also, and these are going to be our customers in the future. What we find right now that there are intermediaries, which are other type of funds that are de-risking the project completely, and they are selling those assets to these funds at 3–4%. This is for them like a bond, meaning that they want to complete the risk asset. So, but there are a lot of intermediaries in the middle who are developing the projects or buying the projects, and they are buying wind turbines from us, squeezing the price, which has to change in the near future because we want to survive. But it's, I think they will be our customers in the future because I think our companies have the capabilities to deal directly with this type of customers. I mean, we represent 70% of the total investment of a project. We can develop projects. We can analyze the wind. We have engineering and construction capabilities. We build the wind. Why we cannot de-risk completely this type of assets to the institutional investors? So there is a lot of appetite, but they want. I mean, they have huge amount of money, but they want stable cash flows, as José Luis mentioned at the beginning.
Mana, you talked about the speed of project development being a key barrier to mobilizing GE capital, let us say, and other investors. How would you speed up project development in Turkey?
Clarity on the process and assigning a timeline for each step. When would it be developed? So today, if you look at projects that's been in the pipeline, some of them have been there for 4 years. And you don't have a clarity when is the final permitting going to be there, because there is multiple bodies, multiple entities that manage this. However, if you can create a streamline to make sure you shorten the process with a clear timeline of how long does it take, what is the clear KPIs you need them to have to be at the input to allow you to have clarity when is this project going to be finalized. So some developers have the capability because they know the market, they've developed the know-how, the competency, so they would understand and they can manage it. But when we're speaking about getting investors from outside to come over here, this is an area that's worrying for them.
Eduardo, do other countries do it better than Turkey?
No, I want to add something to her. I mean, I think in order to be able to be successful in the future and develop more than 1 giga, 1.5, 2 gigawatts in Turkey, I think that having a faster and strengthened development process and more transparent is very, very important. But also when you compare these to other countries where they are executing 2, 3, 4 gigawatts per year, when they grant in the auction system, when they grant the project of the offtake, the project is much more advanced, meaning that the maturity of the project the project is older. There is also interconnection agreement. There are huge bonds for interconnection agreements, so there will be not a lot of trading between developers before it goes into execution. So in order to have a very, very high speed in execution, it's very important that we get, let's say, we are a much more mature development process and approval, and also bonds, and the project is much more mature.
Okay, thank you for that. Marcus?
Yeah, perhaps one thing to add. We just said that there are a lot of bodies involved in the permitting process, and thinking out of the box, perhaps an idea would be to give one of these bodies a leading role or coordination role, and then they are the ones who are coordinating the activities of the others. This is something which in some of the countries have bored at least a little bit of speed, and perhaps this is something which could be a possibility for Turkey to speed up and make it more transparent and more clear how this process works, because then the outside investor is only talking to one body, and all the internal discussions are done within the bureaucracy or the governmental agencies.
Mm-hmm. In the European Union, thank you for making this point, it's now a legal obligation. Every government must ensure there's a one-stop shop that's overseeing the whole permitting process. Now, we're comparing the European Union with Turkey. One of you, I can't remember who, hinted earlier there were lessons that the rest of Europe could learn from Turkey. Certainly Turkey should avoid making some of the mistakes that certain countries in Europe have been making. What are the main lessons the rest of Europe can learn from Turkey in the development of wind energy?
I mean,
José Luis.
I think if we take, without name it, but we saw the big trouble that not planning properly a change in legislation can trigger to the country and to the industry. So instead of stopping mechanism A and implementing mechanism B, keep mechanism A, develop mechanism B. If you are convinced that mechanism B is better than A, switch to mechanism B, but not make the same mistakes. Example: Germany, Spain, among many, Poland. I would say very much all continental Europe countries have made a big mistake in planning the transition from A to B.
Okay, Alfonso.
I was going to say, I understand from our local partners here that, in fact, changing your registration, changing your entire specifications on a wind farm is much more flexible here. If you think what happens in some of our own countries, once you develop a piece of land, you're stuck maybe with one technology, and changing those permits becomes a nightmare. Or changing the distance, hinting Germany, for example. How suddenly you have 1,000 meters. That comes like a bucket full of cold water to developers now. So this is something that here in this country you do have that has been flexibilized, and it's much more agile, and it helps much more to the developers, our customers.
All of our discussions so far has been largely about onshore wind. I don't know about the rest of you. I was quite struck by the positive tone the minister used this morning when he was talking about offshore wind. Two of the five of you, your companies, heavily invested in offshore wind. The other three of you focus solely on onshore wind. Do you think Turkey should be developing offshore wind, or should they be focusing on onshore? Mana?
I think so. The country have a lot of potential. So they have a lot of potential in onshore as well as offshore. I think so in order to start the offshore development, there is a leeway that you need to start with. You need to do all of the studies, the measurement, to make sure you create a strong foundation for this industry to blossom and develop further. It takes a lot of, there is specifically offshore, it's very different than onshore wind development, because you need to do a lot of technical studies, a lot of water studies, soil studies. These things need to be measured, need to be corrected to make sure you create a sustainable method. Now, the offshore business is booming in a very fast scale that you're seeing it. There is a lot of focus. If you speak about the growth of the offshore business, it's phenomenal over the next few years to come. And we're developing, as a technology provider, we're providing technologies that's going to be able to capture that wind at the offshore part and translate it into the best amount of energy by introducing one of the largest offshore turbines. Turkey have the potential. They have fantastic sites with unbelievable wind speeds in offshore, but the question is we need to have the time to develop them, to make sure we have a strong foundation for this industry to flourish. You cannot start it immediately. This is not going to help the industry to be sustainable.
Alfonso?
Yes, let me tell you an anecdote. First of all, if there's a potential, certainly we will be there, but that potential needs to be developed. There's two things. And the anecdote is the following. Yesterday we were talking with a partner of ours, and they were advising us about the existence of a nearshore project. Oh, that's great. I mean, nearshore, that's something that we can do easily from an onshore business unit. So usually onshore, near shore is something that's not really offshore. It's like very close to the shore, but basically you can walk there, you can take a little boat, a barge. Now, a little problem is the near shore was like 30 meters depth. 30 meters depth, that is a little challenging. So what happens? On one hand, you have, like in Spain, by the way, we have our seabed, like in Turkey, goes immediately very deep. That is a challenge. That is an economical challenge. Because right now, the industry is very much developed on offshore, nearshore, where 30, 50 meters is not an issue. You can put a jacket, you can put a monopile, but the deeper it goes, the more costly the solution becomes. So you make either a very, very large investment in steel, or you go for floating. Floating is just starting right now. And floating is, I think, generally accepted in the industry as the solution going forward for this kind of depth. But it's early. So the question is this market, is Turkey ready to pay the premium from being one of the pioneers in offshore? Is this country, is Turkey ready to pay the premium for very massive use of steel when it has other forms, more competitive perhaps, to generate clean energy than offshore? That would be the challenge, I would say.
Do any of the three onshore players wish to comment on this? Eduardo.
I think also the minister said this morning that he's going to be waiting until the cost of the offshore is lower, and I think it's probably still has to mature a lot. I think also Turkey has to do the homework first onshore, and we need to provide the view from 2020. I invite all of you to see a lot of the videos that you will find in internet. Offshore requires massive industrialization and engineering in the area where it's going to be developed. So you will require probably an area of 2 to 5 gigawatts at least in order to make sure that you develop all the engineering, logistics, manufacturing, and you will have to do that on the port. That's one point. The other I think, comment is that Siemens Gamesa, Mitsubishi Vestas, General Electric, I think if you see the pipeline that these companies have, they are going to be executing a lot of megawatts in the near future, and the resources that the companies have for these kind of projects are limited. So I don't think that Turkey will have at this time the required attention from the companies where we have so many offshore developments in the North Sea, in the US, in Taiwan, and now Japan, right? So probably best, let's fix onshore first and then let's go for offshore.
Okay, thank you. Marcus, you talked about electric vehicles earlier and how Enercon are developing charging infrastructure for EVs. In the rest of Europe, we are very clear we've got to drive the electrification of transport, heating and industry in order to accelerate the energy transition, because we can get renewables into electricity, that's fine, but electricity is less than 1/4 of all of the energy that we consume, at least in the European Union. How important is it for Turkey to start thinking already about the electrification of the rest of their energy system?
Well, I think they have already started to think about it. From what I hear from our colleagues from the sales department, from the people present here in Turkey, there are already questions in the direction of charging stations, in the direction of electrical vehicles. So I think the idea has already been spread, and the ideas are already being followed. Of course, it is the same hen and egg problem we have in Germany and some other countries. If you don't have the cars, you don't need the charging stations, and if you don't have the charging stations, no one is buying a car. So this is something where the German government is struggling to give a push. Other countries were very much more successful. If I think of Norway, which were very clear on their regulations, which supported the electrical vehicle industry very much and have a big success there. So this is perhaps also something where the Turkish government can look into and use lessons learned. Countries which are struggling, I've given an example, and countries which were very successful. And at the end of the day, I think you need the right moment to do it, but why not be in the very front of this development, and perhaps being able to really also put a stamp on it, a Turkish stamp on this movement in Europe.
And you talked about power to gas earlier. as well. Do you think Turkey should start working on renewable hydrogen?
Well, hydrogen is something where also we think currently is very early. So the cost for creating the hydrogen and to use it in industrial activities is not sufficient yet. So perhaps it's too early. Power to gas might be an option for storage, to use it for these activities. For the others, I think it's too early, much too early. You have to wait until the technology has been more developed, and you have to wait until more experience are there, and also the openness of the industries using this hydrogen is more given. Since at the end of the day, it's not only a question of money, how much the hydrogen costs for your industrial use, but also it's a political thing. And in those countries where there is a big push for green energy, then of course it's the lever you have with this political argumentation. It's much better, and this is something perhaps which the Turkish government also can use to support these activities.
Okay, thank you for that. Mana, GE is in every corner of the energy system with your wide technology portfolio. How do you see the question of electrifying the rest of the energy system in Turkey?
Well, if you look about the entire energy ecosystem, it's going through tremendous transformation. Electrification, distribution, in which you're actually changing the way that you're selling energy. If you're looking at digitization, there is a major transformation across the board. The question over here is the whole infrastructure need to be developed before you move with the speed that you want it. You cannot start by small steps. Today, Turkey have an ambitious plan, and they've announced that they want to increase their renewable targets, and they want to reach to 20 gigawatt by 2023, which is very ambitious, and we're all supporting them. Hopefully that they can achieve that target. Hopefully that will help them to ease some of the pressure they have on the conventional, which is causing major deficit in their economy. Once this is done, is how can they create the roadmap and infrastructure to move with the speed in all of these major changes of electrification, of decentralization, of decarbonization. There is a whole process and a system for creating that ecosystem, and start by creating the right regulation, the right processes, and the right incentives to push people to go to this direction.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, final issue I want to throw at you all is the Turkish public, the consumers, the taxpayers, the people in whose communities we are building wind farms. What would be your message to the people of Turkey on the energy transition? How would you want to involve them more in the energy transition, specifically in the development of wind energy?
I'll have a go.
Yeah, please.
Maybe I'll start from
here.
Yeah. The way when we look at so GE is a global company, but whenever we go into a new market, we're a local. And we try to partner with all of the local players, even the local communities, to make sure that we create sustainable methods that support them. Today, when you look at it from an economic perspective, renewable is a no-brainer. It makes sense, and it makes sense specifically for Turkey. Now, the question is, how can we create a more sustainable approach by creating the right supplier, creating the ecosystem, which is what of my colleagues have alluded, what's successful in China, creating a very robust, strong ecosystem of supplier. And this is really important because here you're not only going to serve the local Turkish market, but you're going to be part of the global supply chain, a global supply of 60 gigawatt on an annual base. So regardless if your market is going to be a giga or 400 megawatt, you're part of a global supply chain. And the third part is how can we make sure we partner with the local communities when we develop these projects to create employment opportunities for them, to make sure that we're partners for growth with them in developing this. It's an important journey that we create the whole value stream together from all the way from the economic perspective and impact of that on the country. How can that be developed into a more sustainable approach beyond what only Turkey can provide? Then how do we actually connect with people on the ground who have the wind farm next to them and who actually have, how do you partner with them? And we have a lot of success story that we've developed in Turkey, across the region, where most of the employment opportunity during execution and service go to the people from that community. So they look at you as a value to create jobs. In addition, we understand what is the major challenges they have in that community. We've opened a number of healthcare centers. In some communities that made sense, sometimes school, sometimes, some kind of CSR activities that will add value to them.
That's great. Thank you very much. Eduardo.
I will be very brief. I think the message to the people should be that the renewable energy and the wind energy today is already the most competitive source of energy. We cannot stop the energy transition. If we continue like we are today at the level of changing, we are going to be killing the planet. So we need to make sure that we all help together and move to the new business energy model as soon as possible. And I think sooner we have in our minds that we need to change the way we consume, the way we generate energy, the way it's going to be very, very important for the future generation. So we need speed, velocity to move as soon as possible to the new model.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Alfonso.
Well, quite a question. It goes deep inside the roots of every person, I think, in this room here. No? So when we talk about people, it's a very broad term, right? Because what we've been doing here, if you think about it, we've been doing a push. We've been talking to some kind of people. People that can change the regulation for the rest of the people. People can change the framework within which we can operate for the benefit of the larger mass of people. So I think there is a push and a pull, really. And a push, everybody can see that there is climate change. I think nobody can reasonably question anymore that has been as a consequence of increase of CO2 emissions generated by man's hand. That's a fact. You see it through the different storms, flooding, et cetera, et cetera. Though people affected there, trust me, they're going to be much more willing to embrace renewables. But how about all the other rest of the people? There is, maybe if you cannot manage to come to the end of the month with your salary, if you are more concerned of putting food in front of your table, and then I'm talking about people around the world, really, not necessarily Turkey, but this is applicable anywhere. If you're struggling to meet your ends at the end of the month, because then really a larger and noble issue might not be as much of a driver, might not pull you necessarily into it. No? So that happened in my mind always is how do we collectively, because this needs to be a collective decision, that we need to acknowledge first of all that we have an issue that we need to tackle it. But obviously I am, like many of us here, benefiting from very good, healthy, stable financial situation that helps us to concentrate and make this place a better world. But let me tell you also to other people that are struggling to make ends meet. This industry is creating jobs that they can benefit from. In those areas where many times jobs are very difficult to get, without having them to move into the capitals, into the cities. When you have a wind farm, when you have a PV solar panel farm, when you have, usually you don't put it in the middle of the city, right? You put them in areas where you have the right regimes, which usually are far away from urban cities. So this is places, and by the way, the factories that you create with this, these are places where these people can actually also thrive, where we can find place without having to migrate, without having to leave their families. They can actually contribute to something that not only is bringing them bread on their table every month, but also it's contributing to the rest of the world. So it's a wide answer, but at the end of the day, very candidly, when I talk to people, when I talk to anyone, at the end of the day, I think the best way is to lead by example. And my choice was not to only work for Siemens Gamesa or for the renewable energy business, for the compensation because of the challenge, because the purpose. So that is what I lead with, and that is why I always try to convince the people.
Thank you, Alfonso. José Luis.
It's very difficult to disagree with what has been said. Just summarizing from my view, our sector, sometimes you work within the sector and you say, well, you are self-kidnapped by the beauty of the sector and how much it can contribute, and we forget about doing more proactive marketing. So, and what has been said about local communities, social acceptance, I think is a mantra that we need to do better as an industry to sell the beauty that this sector can bring to society and to the communities where we operate. And on top, that there is no many choices. But not having no other choices doesn't mean that local communities will support. And if local communities won't support, projects won't happen. So we need to do an effort as an industry to do a more proactive marketing and communication about our sector, together with our customers, with authorities, with associations, and not being always reacting because there is a small problem here and a small problem there. We have a reactive mode embedded into our DNA, and we need to be proactively communicating the beauty of this sector we work for.
Great. Finally, Marcus.
Yeah, well, I think the important things are already done, but perhaps having a look into the past and compare it and use it as a lesson learned. In the past, the community wind parks have been the driver of the development in Germany on the wind energy. So these small wind parks where the local communities, where people have invested just for one turbine, two turbines, whatever, they were really the driver of the development, and there were no big problems with lawsuits. No one has complained about the turbines. Well, after the many changes the regulations have now received, the local communities are not involved in the same way anymore. There are a lot of large players or larger players, let's say medium-sized player, and so the people are not involved anymore. They have no benefit from the wind farms, or at least not in the same way as they have before. And now we see a lot of lawsuits. Of course, the people don't like that there's a wind turbine and someone else is earning money. And 10 years before, you could build up your own wind farms and you earn your money. And of course, you're not complaining if you're earning money. So I think this is something also, lessons learned, where you could look into countries which have already developed a lot of stuff and have experienced a lot of stuff. And you can see, as a Turkish government, as the Turkish authorities, what has worked and what has not worked, and should be avoided at least.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Ladies and gentlemen, the 5 panelists have given us, I think, an excellent discussion. Please express your gratitude towards them.
Teşekkür ediyoruz panelistlerimize. Sağ olunuz. Ve bir kahve molası veriyoruz.
Thank you very much, distinguished speakers. We're going to break for coffee.